Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about Runeterran Champions, where they started, where they are, and where I think they might be going. We have had a lot of Runeterran Champions come into the game at this point, and there's been some very clear development on the strategies the team wants to employ, putting them into the game, and how they want Runeterran Champions to function. And I'm going to get into all of this alongside this little PowerPoint that I've done here. So first off, the very first Runeterran champion that we ever got that introduced us to this topic of origin abilities is Jhin. And now Jhin was very, very powerful on release, but also kind of a flop. Monty, how do those two things go hand in hand? They can't, right? Well, Jhin was so powerful that they had to pre-nerf a couple cards in anticipation of his release because they expected him to just completely dominate the meta. The other thing about Jhin, as you can see with his origin ability here, you can put any follower that has a skill into your deck. This means that he's tunneled pretty much solely onto an aggro play style, which is not the worst thing in the world, but it does mean that he's more effective in some metas than others. And here we can see what all those lovely things in his origin ability are. Jhin was, compared to other Runeterran champions, Jin's origin ability is incredibly overloaded. This was very clearly a first iteration draft of like how we want Runeterrans to work. They very much streamlined his game plan. They said, yep, you're going to play skills. Skills are going to activate. Jin's going to flip. He's going to do damage out of the hand. He was going to ping, 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 ping. That's what they wanted Jhin to do. And here we see the Lotus Trap. Deal 1 to the enemy nexus if Jhin is in play, stun the weakest enemy. And then here's his actual ability when he attacks. Deadly Flourish, deal 2 to all stunned enemies. And Curtain Call, this is when he levels up. Deadly Flourish becomes Curtain Call, deal 4 to all stunned enemies and the enemy nexus. So we can very clearly see that Riot had a plan with Jhin. They wanted him to be an aggressive champion, to come out of the gate swinging, and to just continually pepper the opponent with these Lotus Traps before finally having a decimate on his attack, which is huge. A decimate is a large chunk of of your opponent's HP. It's easily, it is a fifth of the total HP. So if you get 5 attacks with the level Jhin, never going to happen because they're already low at that point. But if you did, he's killing you all by himself without doing anything else. So this makes Jhin both a very effective champion at getting your opponents low while in the hand because of his origin ability, and at finishing your opponents off because of his own skill. So what went wrong with Jhin? Well, Jhin doesn't really have access to any spells. He's only limited to the spells of the region you pair him with. There's no spells in his skill region. His region is skill units. Is that the worst thing in the world? No. It was actually a really, really intelligent balance limiter for Jhin. Imagine if Jhin could just put any damaging spell into his deck. How ridiculous would that be? We'd see Double Up, Decimate, Noxian Fervor, Mystic Shot, Get Excited Jhin decks, and that would just be wild. Might be a lot of fun, but it would be way too high power level, in my opinion, for the game, and it wouldn't be healthy. So we can see that the team clearly had a design in mind, and they understood how powerful it could be, and they wanted to limit it in some factor. Now, a lot of people on the release of Jhin would have told you that Runeterran Champions are a flop. And honestly, I might have agreed with them at that point at the time. I would have told you that Jhin has potential to get more and more powerful as more cards come out, and that's one of the most amazing things about the design of Runeterran Champions, in my opinion. How they continue to grow and their regions continue to expand organically while all the other regions naturally get their own card pool as well. But Jhin was kind of a flop. Just a little bit. We saw a clear iteration on this Runeterran champion idea, though, with the next... Oh, sorry, before we get into Bard, I should also talk about Jin's and Runeterran champions' spells. Every champion has a champion spell, of course, right? Well, Runeterran champions are their own region, so they all have unique champion spells. Jin's is more thematic than it is powerful, though it still has its moments, and it does play into his origin ability and his win condition, which is something we'll see as a common theme through all the Runeterran champions that we talk about today. His Dancing Grenade is a 4 mana, deal 1 to a unit, create a second bounce in hand at the next round start. So this is not fantastic. It can help you activate your third Lotus Trap if you want, right? If you just need that one extra ping, or maybe you have a Jhin on the board, an extra one in hand, you're not going to get 2 Lotus Traps from that. So maybe you just need to stun a pesky blocker, poke something else off. It has its moments, but really you don't want to be double drawing Jhin. The one thing that I really like about what they did with this is that the second bounce doesn't clog your next draw. A lot of our older champions like Ashe, well, she cycles, so maybe it's a bad example, but a lot of the older champions have, and a lot of the older mechanics, like even Varus and Trapper, the Yeti gets shuffled in on top of the deck. And that can, while that can be a very powerful draw immediately afterwards, you're also oftentimes relying on the next card out of your deck, especially in an aggressive deck like Jhin Annie, which is who he was designed to be paired with. You really want to be fishing for those decimates, for those Noxian Fervors. And if your top deck is getting clogged by a second bounce at a critical moment in that game, you're just going to lose. Second bounce is also very, very powerful. You're getting backloaded power on this, which I think was another good design limiter that they put into place on Jhin, with Jhin. Imagine if he had been able to deal 4 for 4 up front and then 1 for 0 backwards. It might have still been okay, but it gives him a lot more power and a lot more opportunity on an attacking turn, right? Whereas now you have to kind of think ahead a little bit and go, well, maybe I don't really need to use this ping right now, or maybe this ping will be good to activate my Lotus Trap with my Jhin on the board and give me a little bit of defense here with the stun. But I really need to kill this pesky unit on the next turn. They've got this Broadback Protector that keeps healing them, and it's going to go down to 3 HP next turn. I'm going to ping it off with second bounce. So that about covers us on Jhin, and takes us to our next Runeterran champion, Bard. Now, Bard was a little bit different from Jhin. Bard's origin ability lets you put any cards that plant chimes into your deck. And at round start, if you have... This is post-nerf. Originally, it started at game start. Bard would shuffle chimes in for each copy of Bard that you have in your deck. And what chimes do, for those of you that may not know, chimes are just a +1/+1 stat buff, and they stack. And they just are distributed randomly amongst any cards in your hand, as long as they're units, that is. Bard, we saw an iteration on the Runeterran Champion concept, right? We have some followers directly associated with Bard, and a spell! There was a spell directly in the package. This was first, and it showed a lot of people that, okay, Riot kind of understands that, hey, maybe this Jhin thing without spells is a little clunky, a little bit weird. When you're only limited to one region, it can make your deck building choices a little bit awkward sometimes, and you may be tempted to go into a region that doesn't necessarily provide you a lot of value outside of spells, which could be fine and gives you interesting deck building choices, but doesn't always end up in an effective deck build. So Riot clearly became aware of the fact that, hey, Jhin works the way he is because we've streamlined his game plan so much, but we want Bard to be a little bit more versatile. We want Bard to have options of his own. We want Bard to have a little bit of defense. Now, Cosmic Binding isn't the best spell in the world, but it saw some play in Bard Alawi here and there, just as a way to remove an overwhelm blocker or prevent you from dying a little bit. An extra 2 damage is sometimes useful, just as a ping onto a unit, whatever. Bard's cards, on the whole, out of what we saw in release, only 2 of them get played. Only the Bird and the Esmus. Even in Bard decks, Mystic Vortex and Meduli were really never experimented with. So, what does this tell us? This tells us that Riot kind of misappropriated how powerful chimes were going to be, and they kind of misunderstood how long it would take chimes to ramp up. And what we actually ended up seeing was that chimes were very effective in the early stages of the game when stats matter the most. So I had seen people hit 3 chimes on turn 1. It wasn't a frequent occurrence, but it did happen more often than you'd think. And my god, is it impossible to deal with a unit that's been buffed up by a total of 6 stat points on turn 1. It would snowball the game and blow you completely away. So Bard clearly had his own problems. But as we can see here with the champion spell, again, they want these champion spells to be something very, very powerful that ties into the Runeterran Champions theme. Bard's Traveler's Call here draws a follower, then activates the effects of all the boons in the top 3 cards of your deck, and then of course it shuffles a Bard back into your deck. So what that means, boons are not only chimes, but also Nora portals, and we may see more boons in the future. Any positive trap effect in your deck is considered a boon. So this gives Bard both a lot of power if you double draw Bard. Often double drawing Bard was a good thing in the later stages of the game. because Bard decks didn't have a lot of draw power outside of double drawing Bard to make big units, you really wanted to double draw your Bard so that way you could get one unit in the late stages of the game and just scale it to this massive proportion that your opponent wouldn't be able to deal with. And we saw this be very, very powerful, specifically in Alawi Bard and even Bard Noxus, which was a favorite of mine. I love LeBlanc Bard. I really wish that deck would come back, right? Please. And then also with Bard, like the other Runeterran champions, like Jhin, how he continues to get more cards added to his pool through skill units every time they're released, Bard got some direct support with Nora. Got Eclectic Collection and Magical Journey. Now, Eclectic Collection honestly isn't the best support card for Bard, but it is a card that is in his region, so we see this pattern of continually expanding regions, and I think that's great. I love to see that Riot continues to go on it. And Mysterious Journey, of course, is not a card that sees play whatsoever, but it is a decent Conchologist hit once in a while. As far as Bard is concerned, I think Bard has been a little bit over-nerfed at this point, and I think his design was very interesting and not necessarily bad for the game. Just the meta that he found his strength in happened to be a meta that was very dominated by stats, largely because he made it that way. And we saw a lot of complaints, and of course, when complaints come, balance cycles, and you nerf the things that are stronger in favor of something that's a little bit weaker to give it its time in the light. I personally think it's about time to give Bard a little bit more power, maybe give him some bonus cards like we saw how they did with Udyr and some others back in the day. I would like to see Bard make his way back into the metagame. I think his portals I think the idea of boons and chimes are really cool, and I just really liked his playstyle. So, Bard is a clear iteration and a step forward from Jhin, but the next champion takes it even a step further. Evelynn. Now, Evelynn has her problems without a doubt. It turns out that husks involve a little bit too much setup, she's a little bit too easy to disrupt, but her origin ability, as you can see here, is you may put any cards that summon husks into your deck during deck building. Now, what are husks? Husks are 0/1 units with a keyword, either regen, overwhelm, elusive, spell shield, and impact. I think that's all of them. I think that's all the husks. I think there's 5 husks. But those, and what happens whenever you play a card that generates a husk, like Allure, Hate Spike, Salter, Domination, Vora, Solitude, or Steam, it generates a husk on the board, and the next card you play gains any stats that that husk has, as well as the keyword. So this means that you can use husks to pass off large amounts of stats. There's some funny things you can do with stuff like Professor Von Yip, or Sudden Surge, or any other buff spells that you may have to turn temporary stats into permanent stats. And I think that's a very, very cool effect that they gave to Eve. It's unlike anything else in the game, and it's not something that people think about too often when they consider her as a champion. But it shows that they wanted to expand these Runeterran Champions options and how they could potentially be played. Now, as far as Eve's region goes, these cards haven't seen too much play, generally. Hate Spike was buffed up to 1 mana at one point, at which it was played in literally every Shadow Isles deck that could play it, because it was just the premium 1 mana removal option at that point in time. I think Salter saw a little bit of experimentation in Viego concepts, just to give potential Spell Shield or Elusive high rolls, as well as a little bit of extra HP. Also, the Husk's Self-Slay, which plays into Viego's effect. And Domination has seen some play in Azerelia, largely because of its effect of when you summon a 1-cost ally, granted +1/+0. I think Vora has also seen a little bit of experimentation here and there. It's a decently statted unit, but the rest of these cards are not fantastic, and they are a bit of a flop, which I think is part of the reason why Evelynn is considered so weak. Now, Evelynn hasn't really had a deck, hasn't really had her time to shine. She saw a little bit of play with Viego Evelynn back in the day. That deck consistently put up numbers for about 2 or 3 seasons, but I personally always thought it was very disruptible and very easily thrown off its game plan, is the best way to put it, I think. And again, we see here Evelynn's Last Caress, stop all enemy spells and skills targeting Evelynn, and she strikes an enemy. Create an Evelynn in your deck. So again, Riot shows that they want these Runeterran Champion spells to be so powerful, and to not only to be powerful, but to feed into your champion's game plan. Evelynn very much wants to set herself up, get on the board, get some stats, get some keywords, and then bam, 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 slam it. So if your Evelynn gets targeted by a kill spell, or by a strike spell, or by anything, you're suddenly at a huge disadvantage. And again, she also only has the one spell in her pool of Hate Spike. Oh, to Allure. Nobody plays Allure, though. I forgot about it, even though it was just on the screen a moment ago. But because her spells are so limited, and her traditional pairings, or the pairings that they theorized she would go with naturally, didn't really have a lot of protection, they wanted to give Evelynn players a way to live out her power fantasy. It's also incredibly thematic with her ultimate in League of Legends. If you've ever played it, this is basically what she does. She goes invulnerable for a second, she does a giant slash across the field, and she executes all enemies. So, very, very thematic. I love the way they designed this champion spell. I honestly think Eve can be a very powerful champion, and I think she, with some more Husk cards in the future, if they continue to add to them, as they have with other Runeterran champions, we will see a meta that is dominated by Eve at some point. The high roll potential off of the Husk, the spell shield, it can just be ridiculous, and it's very, very scary when it happens. After Evelynn, we got to see the Grandmaster at Arms himself. Jax joined us in the Legends of Runeterra. And now Jax gives you access to any Weapon Master cards. Now, what's a Weapon Master card? Well, let's first take a step back and talk about equipment. With Jax came equipment, a brand new type of card to Legends of Runeterra. Jax also gained a new keyword, auto-equip. He will automatically apply the Light of Icathia. And now, what I think is really cool about Jax's design is that his quick attack and overwhelm, so his powerful keywords, are attached to this piece of equipment that will go back to your hand even if Jax is taken off the field. This means that you can play Jax out early and not feel too bad about losing him so long as you get him leveled up, or even if you don't get him leveled up, if you find a second one down the line, he's gonna continue, like, he works in for his own game plan, and this Light of Icathia will level up down the line if you find the second one. But if you don't find the second one, you can throw it onto another powerful unit and give it quick attack for a cheap 1 mana cost, and it's just there forever. Now, these are our Weapon Master units. Notice I said units. These cards all say improvise, brand new keyword brought in with Jax. It just means that they give you an option of 3 equipment from a pool. These equipment have various stats and keywords and abilities. Just for example, there's an Overwhelm +2/+0. There's a Fearsome +2/+1. There's a +2/+1 that gives you mana on attack. These cards ended up being very, very powerful, but not in Jax. We saw Ionian Hookmaster get nerfed. You see its nerf form up here. It is now an 0/1. This started as a 1/1, and it saw play in literally every Noxian deck that could play it, every Ionian deck that could play it. It crafted archetypes on its own because it gave us access to some other cards that we'll see a little bit later that happen to be in the Ionian region as well. I'm talking about Momentous Choice, as you may have guessed. But I mentioned units. So here's what Riot did differently with Jax. They gave Jax spells directly associated with his origin ability. You can see here that they all have the Weapon Master tag. This is a clear step forward. Riot said, okay, Jhin, we needed to keep him streamlined and no spells because he's just going to be too powerful with spells. Bard, okay, we need to give him some options for defense so he has time to build up his game plan and so he can get to his late game fantasy. Evelynn, they said, okay, she really needs husks to be available to her in the early game. So they gave her 2 cheap spells that give you access to husks in the early game and let her start working towards her level up condition and her permanent level up condition of ally slain. And then with Jax, they said, well, Jax's units are powerful, but there's nothing that we can pair him with that makes him feel complete and whole. So they designed a bunch of cards that are individually powerful, but also work amazingly with Jax's kit. Blades of the Fallen, Catch, Entrancing Lure, Sherry's, and Parts Made Whole are all cards that have seen play both in Jax concepts and outside of Jax concepts. Some more than others. Catch particularly, I'm sure you've seen a lot of in recent times with Aatrox being as popular as he is. Aatrox is a huge fan of this card, and it unfortunately kind of pushed Jax a little bit out of the spotlight. But we did see that Riot is developing and moving forward with their ideas of how a Runeterran Champion wants to operate and how a Runeterran Champion wants to function. Parts Made Whole is honestly the best draw card in the game if you don't consider the drawback of discarding a card. Remember these improvise guys? These guys all make weapons. You always have a weapon available. So that drawback isn't really a drawback. Riot identified that Jax was going to need a way to get fuel and to keep units on the board and to take tempo positive trades. They knew he was going to be a board-based interaction deck, and they clearly designed his region to support that. Blades of the Fallen continues to give you access to units on the field. Catch lets you turn bad trades into positive trades with surprise value. Entrancing Lure guarantees that you're able to pull and take a positive trade. It also gives you a draw. Sharesies lets you take an equipment that is about to be discarded or sent back to hand because your unit's dying and move it to push more damage or make a positive trade or take 2 positive trades. And then Parts Made Whole, as I discussed, is just the most cost-effective draw card in the game. It even gives you a unit on the board. It's, quite frankly, better than Eye of Nakakaboros. It's amazing to me that it hasn't seen more play to this day. And then, of course, Jax's Counter-Strike. Not only is it a very powerful effect, but it's smartly limited to Jax. You can only cast this on Jax, which I think is a good thing, because 1, you won't have access to it unless you have 2 Jax, so 1 Jax needs to be on the field already. But 2, if you could just give any unit Barrier and Forge it, it's not thematic for Jax. Jax is all about soloing and like 1v5s and that kind of stuff if you played League. But it would just be too free to like do whatever you want. Like if you could just play this for the Forge on any unit, it would quite frankly suck. Or quite frankly be too powerful. Not suck, it would be way too powerful. 3 mana Forge plus Barrier. This is just Prismatic Barrier plus, right? And also, I should clarify that Forge just means that you are giving your equipment +1/+0. +1/+1. +1/+1. So, Jax is a champion that unfortunately hasn't seen a whole lot of play beyond his initial release. We saw Bane Jax. But I do think that with the right metagame, Jax could come back into play. I think Jax suffers from the problem of needing his units on the board early, and his level up condition isn't particularly hard to achieve, but it is rather slow. Not only do you need these equipped units to deal damage, you then need to find a Jax, put a Jax on the field, and then have equipped units on the field alongside the Jax while attacking for him to get his buff. And it's just not quite enough. After Jax, we saw the release of the Cultists. This is Kayn. As you can see, the Shadow Reaper's origin ability states you may put any Cultist cards into your deck during deck building. Once you have summoned 3+ Cultist cards, draw a Kayn. This is a super powerful origin ability. This is very clearly Riot saying, okay, I like what we've done before. We kind of experimented giving Jax like a more concrete region. He's got a more complete toolbox. But what are we going to do next? It wasn't quite enough. Also, what if people weren't finding their Jax, so he wasn't winning them the game? So how do we fix that problem with our next champion? And we see the solution here with Kayn. After you've played the 3 cards, he draws. Kayn also auto-equips himself. He's got the Darkened Scythe here. You can see it. It's a 0/0 attack, grant the Darkened Scythe +1/+0. This, again, plays into Kayn's level up ability and plays into his power fantasy. He wants to challenge a unit, grow this Scythe, then he's going to flip into either Rost or the Shadow Assassin. Rost gives you Overwhelm and heals your Nexus. The Shadow Assassin gives you Elusive, and the Shadow Scythe grows a little bit faster. We see the Corrupted Scythe and the Shadow Scythe here. These scythes will keep their effects from the previous one, keep any growth, from the previous one. So Then we also see here that Kayn's Shadow Step, again, this is his champion spell, plays into his power fantasy, plays into his level up condition, and is just a generally powerful effect. Also, because Kayn is double drawn, you will almost always have access to this during a game. If you open with a Kayn in your hand, you're going to draw the second one just by naturally playing your cards out. So, you may have noticed that I skipped ahead and didn't show you guys the cards. And that's because alongside Kayn, we got, well, a little bit after Kayn, we got Varus, a secondary cultist champion. Monty. Runeterran Champions only have one region. You can't pair them. You're right. They share the Cultist Region, but you have to use these individually. You can't play 2 Kayn, 1 Varus, and then 3 Vayne if you wanted. It's not allowed. That's not how this works. But I thought it was very, very cool that Riot said, okay, we're going to design this next region for 2 Runeterran Champions, not just 1. I thought it was very interesting, and I thought it was very smart, and it let them do a lot of cool things with this region idea. And just before we get into the cards, we'll talk a little bit about Varus' ability here. Varus also auto-equips when you play a spell or equip an ally. The bow gains +1/+0, max +5/+0, until the next time my bearer strikes. So this is all a very interesting limiter, because part of what you want to do with overwhelm units is kill their blockers. Well, if you strike with your equipped unit, with your Varus here, to try and kill the blocker, you're going to lose all your power up and you're not going to be able to kill your opponent anymore. So there's a limiter there. It's built into the champion, right? Anticipated how powerful the effect of Varus could be. And this is just the level 1 bow. The level 2 bow goes up to +10/+0, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And it's the same effect. And then we see Varus' Chain of Corruption, his champion spell here. Again, another champion spell that plays perfectly into his power fantasy. Give an enemy vulnerable, give an ally +1/+0. This works with the Darkened Bow. It works to let you find a finishing power by pulling big enemies out of the way or pulling small enemies underneath your overwhelm units. And the other nice thing about the Darkened Bow is that if your Varus dies, like Kayn, like Jax, you can re-equip that weapon onto somebody else. Now, let's get into the Cultist cards themselves a little bit here. We see Buru Cultist, Forsaken Bacchae, Lunari Cultist, Keeper of the Box, Shadowblade Fanatic, and Blooming Cultist here. Blooming Cultist has since been nerfed and lost a tune. Mobalytics, update your stuff, guys. Come on. But you can see a clear theme here. They want to give the region access to a lot of different stuff. Buru Cultist is an aggressive card. It lets you push ping damage over and over again on every attack turn. Forsaken Bacchae is a card that helps you streamline your game plan. Predicts, of course, really help to enable your draws and make sure that you're finding the cards that you need when you need them. It's very, very powerful, very cool. Lunari Cultist plays it very nicely with Varus' effect. When I'm summoned, or once you've equipped an ally this game, create a gem in hand. It's also valuable for Kayn, who wants to be attacking and can't always heal back up to full after that attack. Gives you a little bit of extra health. Keeper of the Box gives you some survivability once you've as well as a way to put on a little bit of pressure. Fearsome units are quite powerful early in the game, but this is a very smartly designed card in my opinion, because its attack and HP are so small, but its keywords are so fantastic. And it's designed to be played with equipment, so it's almost always going to be a lot bigger and a lot more effective than what it just appears. Shadowblade Fanatic is just a 3-mana 3/3 quick attack, already fantastic stat line, and it creates a Shadow Fiend in hand. Shadow Fiend is a 1-mana 4/3 ephemeral unit. I'm sure you've seen it at this point. This card hasn't seen too much play, but it is a very good card for the toolbox of the Cultist region. Sometimes you just need an additional blocker. Sometimes you just want to go one wider to be able to go a little bit faster. And with something like Varus' Chain of Corruption, you can always pull that pesky blocking unit out of the way onto your ephemeral unit that you just don't care about. Anytime you can get free cards, it's a good thing. Blooming Cultist, once you've equipped an ally this game, grant me Elusive. Again, another card that plays into this aggressive style that you can clearly see just from these first set of cards that I've shown. Riot had an idea of what they wanted to do with Cultists, and they wanted to give them different directions to explore, like they have with most other regions. And here we see the second set of Cultist cards, or units anyways. Noxian Defector. Quick attack, 4 mana, 2/4 attack, grow my power to that of the strongest equipped ally this round. This card was very clearly designed to work with Kayn and Varus. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a flop. It just comes down at an awkward time and doesn't really work with other cards on the field at that point in time. But it's still a very interesting effect, and it forces your opponent into blocking if you've managed to build up a powerful unit to this point, which is something that you should be able to do in a cultist deck like this. Ambitious Cultist gives you a little bit of value. Once you've equipped an ally this game, create a new spell in hand that costs 2 in hand and set its cost to 0. So it's got a couple different things going for it here. It's a new spell, which is not always important, but kind of important if you ever wanted to do like some Seraphine shenanigans or some Catastrophe shenanigans, Pursuit of Perfection. But also, this card is very, very well statted defensively. 3 attack is just enough to kill most units, and 5 HP is enough to take 1 or even 2 blocks a lot of the time, or an attack and a block. And you can see that they wanted to give the region some value, some survivability, and some offense with the Ranger Knight Defector here. It's 4 mana, 4/3 tough, great stats yet again, and then once you've equipped an ally this game, grant me Scout. Very, very interesting card. Very powerful card, fits nicely in with Demacia, and the thing I love most about this is that it unlocks scouts from Demacia, Bandle, and Bandle has 1 scout, and Bilgewater. I thought it was very, very interesting that they gave this Cultist region access to Scout. Again, we can clearly see that they wanted it to be a toolbox region, and they wanted these cultists to be powerful and have lots of options. The final unit in the Cultist region is the Iceveil Cultist. Your equipped allies have Overwhelm. 5 mana, 5/5. This unit, unfortunately, kind of a flop. You don't really need your equipped allies to have Overwhelm to be able to win the game as a Cultist deck, because your Cultist Champions are doing it for you. But it gives this region a win condition. It gives this region a way to push its advantage, and it is, if not the most impressive card, at least a card designed with good intentions. And I think that it makes a lot of sense for Riot to have put this card in with the Cultist package and created the Cultist package in the way they have. Now, the other thing that Kayn and Varus got a little bit different from the previous Runeterran Champions is that they have a plethora of spells. And these spells all play very nicely into what they want to do. They all synergize nicely with equipment, and they give you some defense, they give you some offense, they give you some value. Tempting Prospect here lets you search your deck, thin your deck. Hasn't seen too much play, but it is an interesting card, and it makes sense as an addition for this Cultist region. It gives you the option to play like a combo style if you want, and gives you the option to play like a very specific mid-rangey deck where you're trying to look for certain keywords or abuse certain keywords. Momentous Choice is undoubtedly the most powerful buff spell in the game. 1 mana for +2 of stats is crazy. This condition is not a condition in this region because all your units have equipment. The Violent Discord is a card that works really nicely with stuff like Ezreal or Seraphine or anything else that duplicates. And it gives the Cultist region a little bit of defense. But the real defensive spell for this region is Furious Wielder. An equipped ally strikes an enemy. Gives them access to a strike spell. You know who wanted strike spells? This guy. This guy wanted strike spells. Helps him work with his level up condition. A little bit anti-synergistic with Varus, but not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It could also be positively synergistic in some cases where you need that extra little bit of attack power to take out this pesky unit from your opponent. Then we have the Sudden Surge, which doubles both as a defensive and an offensive tool. I like to call this a reactionary buff. You really don't ever want to be using this aggressively, but when your opponent goes to Mystic Shot your 2 mana, your Blooming Cultist, bam, Sudden Surge. Now it's a 5/5. Well, it's been nerfed. It's a 4/4 now, but still, you guys get what I'm saying. This card is very, very powerful, and it gives cultists a way to keep their units on the board, which is very important to them. The Unending Wave is incredible draw power. It has the downside of giving the cards fleeting, which can be problematic in a cultist region because a lot of your cards are more expensive. But it's a very interesting card that for the region to have access to because you are able to build like a low to the ground swarmy style deck with it if you really wanted to. It opens up the options for your champions. And then Scuffed production. Order sent to back. Scuffed production. Oh no, okay. I guess I just screwed up. There's this was supposed to be the Unforgiven Cold. Here. I got it. I'll fix it. Don't worry. Live fixing. But while I'm doing that, we'll talk a little bit about the other cards. The Expanse's protection here is Spell Shield. Again, very, very good protection card for the region to have access to. Cheap, better Bastion, as people would say. And it is just a good card to help you protect your Kayn, to help you protect your Varus. Heck, to help you protect any unit that you might need to stick around, even one of your other champions that you've paired up with. And it shows that Riot wanted this region to be that kind of toolbox region, as we've discussed. And then the next card that we have here, this is supposed to be the Unforgiven Cold, which it is not yet, but it should be. Here we go. There we go. There it is. There's the Unforgiven Cold. And I'd even double check this too. That's funny. That's okay. So the Unforgiven Cold, this is now 5 mana. It again, Mobalytics hasn't updated their stuff, but the Unforgiven Cold is the premier protection spell. This was being played outside of Cultist Region because it was so powerful. It turned negative trades into positive trades. It bought you an extra turn. It bought you 2 extra turns in some cases. It also beat Spell Shield. A very, very, very powerful card. And again, Riot clearly recognized the flaws with the earlier designs of Runeterran Champions and how they lacked ways to protect themselves in their own regions and how they lacked ways to set themselves up in their own regions. And they've iterated on that. And then the next card we see here is Heedless Resurrection. Once you have equipped an ally this game, I cost 2 less, revive the strongest dead ally champion. This is very powerful. This is the Rekindler without a 4/4 body, but also for 4 mana less. It's a pretty good trade-off if you ask me. Again, the condition's not really a condition in this region combo. And this card is interesting because it can be played in all sorts of decks. Like, letting you revive a champion is really, really powerful. A lot of champions are balanced around the fact that you can only have one on the field at a time. While in some cases, you're going to be able to get 2 or even 3 of the same champion on the field with this card. So 3 might be a little bit of a stretch goal, but 2 is not that uncommon. Especially given that we're playing cultists whose champions draw themselves. So you're often going to have access to them. And then the final card in the region is Utter Devastation, which is an 11 mana spell that kills all units except allied darkened and allied equipped units. It's a one-sided ruination, basically. And this card is very powerful. It's starting to see some play recently in the Shadow Isles Aatrox deck. But it's a very cool card for the Cultist Region to have access to because, again, it gives them the option of going that control, slower, endgame style plan. We can see very, very clearly between all the cards here that Riot wanted to give this region combo, the Cultist Regions, a fully fleshed out pool of cards to allow it to go any direction it wanted. A lot of the complaints people had with the earlier Runeterran Champions is that they felt too locked in with only one combination available to them. And Riot solved that issue very, very cleanly. Now, part 2 is coming up soon. In part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit about Aatrox and Ryze and how they have continued to iterate on what the Cultist Region did for Runeterran Champions and where I think Runeterran Champions are going to go in the future. Stick around and stay tuned. Hit that like and subscribe. I can't talk today. I don't know why I decided to do this as a one-take Jake. I hope you guys don't find this too cringe, but I'm enjoying myself. Anyways, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm planning on releasing a lot more videos in the future. I plan to release at least 2 or 3 videos a week going forward. Various videos, video essays sometimes, gameplay videos other times, but stick around for part 2 because it'll be great.